Across the Midwest, days of pounding rainwater swelled to historic floods that swallowed entire towns.
The dam has failed. 100% failure. Evacuate the area.
The worst of the waterborne havoc swept over central Michigan, where surging waters overwhelmed two nearly century-old dams, submerging whole towns beneath the deluge, and driving those quarantining from the pandemic out of their homes and into the streets.
We quickly packed our two dogs, a couple changes of clothes, and ourselves. We had to do what we had to do as far as finding a place to stay, otherwise we would be sleeping in our vehicles.
In a prescient warning, one of the breached dams, the town of Midland's 96-year-old Edenville Dam, was rated unsatisfactory in 2018. It's now the latest failure in a nationwide infrastructure crisis. Floodwaters blew electrical boxes and collapsed bridges like dominoes. Bridge after bridge after bridge.
It's hard to believe that we're in the midst of a 100-year crisis, a global pandemic, and that we're also dealing with a flooding event that looks to be the worst in 500 years.
As Michigan struggled to cope, President Trump threatened to cut funding for the state over the way it is preparing for the November election. President Trump opposes an expansion of mail-in voting, saying fewer Republicans would be elected that way. And the state of Michigan has sent applications for all of its 7.7 million voters to vote by mail. But the threat to withhold funding at a time when Michigan is a hotspot both for coronavirus and flooding could hardly come at a worse time. Whitmer, a Democrat, urged the president not to inject politics into the crisis.
One another is not the enemy is a virus, and in this case the enemy is also a flood.
The waters surged across Michigan and the Midwest. In Illinois, a river swept over its banks and into the town of LaSalle. In Ohio, first responders rescued stranded residents in boats after streets turned to streams. Back in Michigan, local officials say they fear the worst is yet to come as floodwaters continue to swell. John Hendren, Al Jazeera, Chicago.